We're going to be going deep now and really exploring and examining the current state of employer branding with our panel of analysts. So I want to introduce the panel. We'll work our way down. We have William Tincup, Principal Analyst of Key Interval Research. You can find him on Twitter at William Tincup. We've got Madeline Laurano, Chief Research Officer of Aptitude Research. Aptitude, God, it's a very small font over here. I'm very sorry. Aptitude Research Partners. You can find her on Twitter. Her handle is there. And we've also got Josh Bersin, Principal and Founder of Bersin by Deloitte, and he's on Twitter at Josh_Bersin. The panel is going to be led by TMP Worldwide's VP of Digital Strategy, Louis Vong, and he is at TMPWW. So Louis is going to lead the discussion, and we're going to turn it over at some point to Q&A from the audience. So if you have questions for any of the analysts, we'll have an opportunity to get to those in just a bit. Thank you. Thanks for joining us.
Great, thank you. All right, can everybody stand up and do 10 jumping jacks? And then we'll get started. Just kidding. All right, so we're going to have a really lively discussion here. Obviously, our panelists here have a lot of experience and have seen a lot of things change as social media has come about and as employer branding become a more bigger topic for a lot of companies. So I'm going to hit them off with this first question. We've mentioned it in some of the sessions earlier today about companies in the news, right? So I'll just refresh your memory. Amazon, New York Times article. Netflix, starting a new maternity paternal leave for 12 months, right? And then you've got, here in the Bay Area, HP, the dress code issue. Anybody heard about the dress code issue for HP? You did, right? Okay. So we want to talk about a little bit all these things, okay? All right, so obviously, companies in the news, does that affect the employer brand? What should companies do? How should we look at affecting change based on what's out in the news today? And we'll just go down the line. Anybody want to go for it?
Well, maybe I'll start. Obviously, I mean, if you've read the Amazon article, I think the Volkswagen story is an example that's going to come out. If there's going to be employment branding issues about what's going on in there. HP, virtually every company that has some sort of controversial news about their workforce, it's now all transparent. And I would say, maybe just to start the conversation, my reaction is you probably shouldn't judge the stories too harshly until you really know what's going on. In the case of us being here with Glassdoor, I looked at the Amazon story came out. I was not really allowed to comment on it, within Deloitte. But I looked at the Glassdoor ratings of Amazon, and they weren't that bad, actually. They were actually pretty good. And you read the commentary by a lot of the people that commented on the article, and there was a lot of people that were very negative, but they were not employees of Amazon. Actually, the employees are back and forth. And I think what it pointed out to me was, A, that culture is naked. So if you have a poor culture, if you're not a healthy company inside, you're going to be an unhealthy company on the outside. It's only a matter of time. And that's why your job is so important. You guys aren't just creating the brand, you're communicating the brand and feeding it backwards inside the company when there's problems so that they can be fixed internally, and we can talk about that maybe as another topic. And the second is that I think maybe when the stories are very controversial, the really issue is fit. I don't necessarily believe there's anything wrong with the way Amazon runs their business. They've been very successful. They've transformed a lot of industries. And people that don't have to work there don't have to work there, don't want to work there, don't have to work there. And that's kind of my reaction to that story. But I'll let you guys comment a little bit on it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it brings up the question of transparency too. When I hear a lot about these stories, and Starbucks is another one, you really think about the type of companies that are out there, and you have companies that are either companies that listen, or you have companies that are companies that talk. And I think most of the stories focus on the companies that talk. Companies that maybe aren't open to feedback, whether it's negative, maybe aren't transparent with how they run their company. Amazon as an example, instead of saying, yeah, we're a hardworking company and we want hardworking people, to say that's actually not true and kind of deny some of that. Or you have companies that listen, and unfortunately, we don't hear enough of those stories out there in the media. And we saw a lot of those today. When we heard from Dell about an example that was very real. They had a candidate come in and say, this was a horrible experience, and I don't even think I want to be a customer anymore. And yeah, I'm running a $200 billion budget, or whatever it was. And hearing from other companies like Salesforce saying, we actually need to improve our candidate experience. And we got feedback, and we're willing to listen. and make our changes. So I think that kind of, is a hard thing. We're hearing a lot of these stories about companies that are just talkers, and not enough of the companies that are listeners that's saying things aren't working and we want to make a change.
Well, adding to obviously what Madeline and Josh has already said, I think the shocking part of the Tiger Woods story was that there was a brand that was portrayed, and then there was a brand that was real. So when it first came out that there was a philandering, serial philandering, etc., I think it shocked people at their core because they had an idea, they had an image of what Tiger Woods was. That's brand, right? I think none of the sponsors had an idea of what Tiger Woods was, and that wasn't true. So I guess the way that we translate to B2B brands is, or B2C brands, is be who you are. And in the case of Amazon, which, I have some friends that actually work at Amazon, have for a long time, they work really hard. It's almost like, more like Wall Street. People that work and thrive on Wall Street thrive at Amazon because of the smart people that are around them, the cool projects that they're working on, the transformation, innovation, work-life balance, yet you don't care about that. But making work-life balance the thing that we all care about is actually a fail, because it might be important to your company, but it might not be important to your company. And I think that's where you have to kind of be who you are, represent that both internally and externally.
Actually, let's, on the Amazon, do you think that article was good for their brand or bad for their brand?
I think it's good for their brand. I think that the people that are ardent Amazon supporters actually came out in droves. I mean, if we were to look at their sales or their web statistics after that, I guarantee that they spiked because of what went on. I mean, if we were to go and look at Glassdoor statistics, I bet you a bunch of people read that and went, that's not true, that's not us, that's not, no. And then they went in and chimed in. Maybe those are people that didn't chime in, former employees or current employees that wouldn't normally have done that. It motivated them to do that, to tell that story. So some will argue that that a negative story is not good for you. I think in this case it was good for Amazon.
I think it could have been, I think that's probably true, and it probably was good for them to kind of bring transparency about what it really was. I just wish the reaction from Amazon leadership and from a lot of executives that work there was, yeah, we work hard, and this is our culture, and we're hard workers, and we want people that work here that are hard workers, instead of denying maybe some of what those realities were.
So don't apologize, embrace it. Would you go that far for them in this regard?
Or maybe own your culture and not try to pretend that it's something it's not.
Right. I think my guess is that Amazon is that way for a purpose, and actually there's a lot of quotes from Bezos that explain that, and that's okay. I think being honest about it is perfectly fine. I think the New York Times didn't really do them any favors by writing that article, but those of us that are in HR, it was great. Now we can have a conversation about culture to every one of our CEOs and what brand means. So they opened up Pandora's box for all of us.
I think earlier in some of the conversation we were talking about self-selection. So that part of that is what that article does, right? Self-select those who don't think they'll fit within that culture. That's great. Thank you. Actually, yesterday I was at the happy hour. One was there, I think, right? And I actually had a conversation with two people about the HP dress code. And one person, I'm not going to point them out, but one person said, dress codes aren't a big deal, and so brought up the topic of, all right, so if you're a hotshot developer in the Bay Area, and you go to interview and they say, oh, by the way, you must wear khakis and a dress shirt to work every day. Tell me, do you think dress code is important as a brand, as a culture, and things like that?
Well, let me make a comment on this, because I've spent the last 2 years studying employee engagement and looking at data and tools and models and talking to a lot of companies. I'll tell you something I learned from the Glassdoor data, and actually I don't think Andrew is here from Glassdoor, but if you look at the Net Promoter Score, the willingness to recommend your company question in Glassdoor, which is sort of, in some sense, the most important question, would you recommend your company as a place to work? And you correlate the other questions against it. I mean, guess what the most highly correlated question that actually contributes to that is leadership. The second most highly correlated is management. The third is career development. And then far down the list, almost at the bottom, very much less important, is work environment and compensation and benefits. So people, even though dress code might feel important when you walk in as a cultural thing, it doesn't really stick with people that much if they get the other things taken care of. So my reaction to that is, you know, some people may not like it, but it's less important than you think. Now, you guys might feel different.
Yeah. Anyone a nudist? Thing is, turns out we all adhere to some social mores, and we wear clothes, so we all have a dress code on some level, right? No one's nude. So it is self-selecting. If you work in Wall Street, you don't have a three-piece suit, you're not going to work there that long. That's it. I remember when my sister-in-law went to work for Perot Systems, which was spun out of EDS, and it was a kind of a kindler, gentler EDS. And they had a casual Friday, and it was a big deal because most of the time they were in suits. Like, if you join that culture, if you aspire to join that culture, you understand the game. You understand that that's the bit. And if you don't, self-select, don't do it. But we all wear clothes, so there is some level of dress code and decorum. So I don't think it's that big a deal. I think the people at HP signed up for it and love it, or leave.
They don't have a dress code, by the way.
There's actually another thing, just if you're in the D&I, diversity and inclusion part of your company, there's this concept of covering. Have you ever heard that term? Mm-hmm. It's the concept of not bringing your whole self to work and hiding who you are, you know, your gender preferences, your clothes, your behavior, the way you talk, and that actually is a problem in a lot of companies. That's a pretty significant issue that's very hard to deal with, but I think the dress is relatively minor, actually. But
I agree with that.
Yeah, okay, great. I was just curious to see if because that's been the big topic here, you know, and HP put a big video out to counter the discussion, so it's interesting to hear you say that. Okay, let's talk a little bit about, and we've heard a little bit this earlier from Dell, the importance of the consumer brand and the employer brand working side by side, and that one can affect the other. I don't know if, is there anybody here from GE by any chance? Nobody? Well, do we have somebody? Mm-hmm. Okay, great. All right, so GE's been doing consumer brand commercials for 5-6+ years, and the consumer brand commercials are all actually recruitment brand commercials, if you take a look at them. Have any seen the most recent GE commercials that are running on air right now? You have, right? It's a recruitment ad, right? Right, and it's targeting. So let me just give you the story for those who haven't seen it. All right, here's the scene. A 27-year-old male with glasses walks into his apartment. He opens the door. And this is like a 30-60 second spot. He opens the door, and 4 of his friends are standing there with a big cake, congratulating him on this new job he just got. And so he gets there, and they say, congratulations. And they're like, hey, what, did you get the job? And he says, yes, I did. I'm working for GE. And they're like, GE? And he's like, yeah, I'm going to be building stuff to save people's lives. I'm going to be helping hospitals create better services to make patients have a better care. And the friends are like, you're not building apps? You're not doing what we think developers do. And so that's their consumer brand campaign. So it's brilliant, and it sounds just like a recruitment ad. So talk a little bit about how that sort of consumer brand, how important that has with the employer brand, and maybe some anecdotes or anything about how have you seen that change for different companies?
I think it's very important, and they're certainly intertwined. I mean, if you have a strong consumer brand, it's certainly going to be easier for you as a recruiter to be able to recruit and kind of position your employer brand. But I think what the challenge is for a lot of companies is that there isn't communication between the two. So you'll have a consumer brand and a focus on messaging and targeting a certain audience, and then an employer brand that recruitment might be managing that happens in a silo, isolated from what marketing and communications are doing with the consumer brand. And I think that's where it gets dangerous for organizations, to make sure that those align, that there's communication. And we've heard that a couple times from different presenters here about, you know, is it necessarily marketing that owns your employer brand, or is it recruitment? There needs to be communication between the two.
yeah, and I think we might, I would suggest maybe we have the relationship backwards. If you want to be a great business, you have to have a business strategy and a product and an employee strategy that appeals to customers, period. So and that means you hire people that fit that culture and they're happy. That Southwest Airlines is a great example. They don't really need to do employment branding at all because people just realize that the people working there are great and they're having fun. They think, wow, it'd be fun to go work there. So I really think if if you take your time and push back on the management of your company and make sure that they are doing everything they can to be incented and motivated to drive engagement up, to take care of people, to give them the things that make them happy, whatever that may be in your culture, your employment brand will be better as a result. And you know, the experience I've had with a lot of the companies I've talked to is when the customer, when the revenue is down, when the retention is down, when the customer service is down, the chances are the reason for that is that the employees are not happy. It's not the reverse. So, and we heard that from the enterprise rent-a-car folks this morning. I think the employment brand is the customer brand. It creates it. So we need to realize, we need to kind of explain to your HR departments that if we manage the inside of the company well, the outside of the company does better.
Yeah, I tend to take a fairly obtuse look at this because your employer brand is that chandelier. That's brand. That's all brand. That's candidate brand, prospect brand, customer brand, employee brand, partner brand, all the other different brands. If you move around the chandelier, you see something a little bit different, but essentially it's the same thing. When people interact with your receptionist, that's brand. When they talk to somebody in support, that's brand. When they talk to a sourcer or recruiter, that's brand. It is just brand. And the more we talk about it as something that's separate and unique, the hard part of that is we've got most of that wrong because we think of employer brand, everything that happens before onboarding. And I would tell you that where a lot of employer branding, the discussions are going in the future are about how employees don't see you living your values, and that's employer brand. Your people that leave your firm, voluntary or involuntary, the treatment of those folks, that's employer brand. So we're focusing right now because we're very early in this maturity of what is and isn't brand from an HR perspective because we're focused on talent acquisition. We're focused way over on one side of it. But all that's going to be in front of us. And I think the more that we try to look at brand and say, all of these things have to be congruent. Because when things aren't congruent, that's what gets us in trouble.
How many employers here have their employer brands partnering with marketing departments? Okay.
Congratulations.
Great, great. That's the way it needs to be. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about best place to work. You know, we've talked about, I think someone mentioned there's slides coming down from your cafeteria to one floor to the other, and ping pong tables, foosball becomes quite cliche now in the .com world. Are all of these things, and I think we talked a little bit about it too, about the dress code, are these important at all in regards to this brand?
Well, first of all, best place to work, great place to work are kind of a sham.
It is.
Insofar as it's an award. And if you
Who
want
can
to
fill out
game
the
it,
best forms?
if you want to game it, you can, turns out. You can win those awards, but it'll actually backfire on you in a way, in a very unique way, that if you purport yourself as the best place to work and you don't back that up, then you're not a best places to work. And it's when people find that out, either prospects or customers or employees or candidates, when they find out, well, yeah, you keep talking about best places to work, and then you treated me this way. So recognize that those things are awards and they're to be gamed. If you want them, go get them. Cool, collect them like merit badges. I don't care. But at the end of the day, you're going to be judged on how you treat people day in and day out, how you live your values day in and day out, even when it's tough. That's where character's born, not on things that you can control. It's on how you react when things go badly. So I've won best places to work, by the way, a couple of years. Mm-hmm. So I'm judging myself, and even at the time, I said this is a really shrewd retention strategy. Because at the end of the day, if we pay people above market rate, our benefits are above market rate, and our work environment is above market rate, they're never going to want to leave. So it's a retention strategy. But I was very jaded, even very early on with best place to work, because it's just an award. That's it.
Well, I would say, let me add another thought on this. Most of the data shows that real retention and engagement is driven by career opportunities, respect, recognition, empowerment, management things. Things that actually have nothing to do with the office or whether you're sitting next to a window or any of that stuff. Those things are not really that highly correlated to it, which really are things that are owned by management, not by HR. Those are really management principles. And I don't know how your companies are, but most companies are going through a complete re-engineering of the way people are managed, the performance management process, how goals are set, how they're evaluated at the end of the year. And part of that is really driven by this transparency of the workforce of places like Glassdoor, that if we don't treat people well, if we don't give them fair and continuous improvement and feedback, they get upset, they post information on Glassdoor, they leave the company, and your brand goes down. So I would suggest that many of these issues really come back to leadership and management itself, which is really the lifeblood of what makes companies healthy. And again, for you guys in the employment branding part of this, your job is to sort of send these messages back to the people that are leaders and running the company and doing the leadership development, that these are issues they need to deal with at the management side. And there's only so much communication you can do that will make up for it. And I don't think most of the data does not show it's the facilities or the benefits that are really the issues.
I agree 100%. Even growing up, just to bring in a personal story, my dad worked for a bank, and it was not flashy, not exciting. There were no slides, no free food, no happy hours. No one grabbed a cocktail after work ever. He was home. He had to wear a suit every day. Talk about a dress code. And my sister got very sick when we were in high school, and she was in a hospital for a very long time. And insurance was running out. Insurance ran out for my mom. Insurance ran out on my dad's side. And the CEO of the bank called my dad into his office one day and said, "I'm going to personally pay for your daughter." And my dad still gets, very teary-eyed and very emotional when he talks about this organization. And he stayed there for his entire tenure. So think about retention, think about satisfaction, think about loyalty, think about trust. Those are all things that were much more meaningful than if he got to slide down a chute every day and grab his free bag of popcorn.
I think Wilmy had mentioned about it's about, in regards to the brand, it's about what you experience, right? And you guys have all been saying this, and we've all been saying this as well, candidate experience, right? So when you look at consumer brands, I think the reason why a lot of people love a brand like Apple or whatnot, it's because it appeals to all your five senses, right? It's taste, smell, touch, sight, and sound. And that's what creates brand immersion, because we can touch all those things. Should employer branding do some of that? And if they should, how should that look?
Well, I'll give you one thought on this, and we've actually been finishing a bunch of research on HR and what's wrong with HR, because let's face it, HR is not rated that highly in general around the world by business leaders. I think it's roughly a C- on the last research we did. And one of the things that I think we have to think about and apply to HR is this concept of design thinking. Design thinking has taken over software, it's taken over product design. It's understanding the experiences that the customer or the employee or the candidate has throughout the process. So it isn't just the video, and it isn't just the website, and it isn't just the interview questions. It's what is that person experiencing from beginning to end, and how can you sort of understand those touch points and create the right experiences along the way. I think that's a discipline we all need to get good at in HR that will really help us understand this whole candidate experience as well as the employee experience.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is the harder part of that is, and I believe everything that Josh just said, I actually believe in procession, I believe in those touch points. The hardest thing is there are no real best practices in what you're doing. You can look at someone else and be enamored, maybe even kind of learn some things on things you should try. But at the end of the day, it's highly personalized to you, your company, your customers, your employees, where you're at in the maturity curve. There's so many things that make it to you. So one thing I'd say when I've said this before is take your right arm, put it out in front of you real quick. Good. Shake your fingers. Now look at your index finger. Your arm is the industry in which you play. Your fingers are companies in which you're probably close to your competitors or whatever. And that fingerprint on your index finger, that's your employer brand. It's highly, we all have hands. Well, most of us, anywho.
All those fingerprints got stolen by the Chinese.
Sorry about that. Sorry. So sorry. But that fingerprint is yours. It's your company's. It's truly unique to you. And it's almost like a moment in time. It's a snapshot, a Polaroid. And so it's hard. There are no easy answers, and I think if you're looking for silver bullets, you're probably going to be disappointed because there are no silver bullets. And I think one of the things Josh and Madeline and I have seen over the years is that Zappos has done a wonderful job telling their story about what makes them truly amazing. And if you go to Vegas and you do the tour, it really is truly amazing. Done, stated, covered. But what works for Zappos will not work for you. Sorry. So read the book, take the tour, but do not try to become Zappos. It's going to fail. Immeasurably, it'll fail for you. It'll blow up in your hands like dynamite, and then you'll lose that fingerprint.
Well, in fact, that brings up a point I want to mention. You know, one of the things we found in our research that we really need to inject into HR is experimentation and innovation. A/B tests. Try a couple different things in different groups and see what works better. That's how research works, that's how engineering works, that's how product design works, that's how marketing works. We can do the same thing in HR rather than, you know, sit around and design a giant complicated process and then roll it all out and find out that 3/4 of it nobody knows how to use. We have to get much better at being innovative and creative, because I agree with William. The best practices, you're going to have to invent them in your company. And that's kind of an inspiration, I think, for HR in general.
Back to Jeff Bezos for just one moment. He was quoted a couple years ago saying, if you're going to be a leader, there's periods in which you're going to be misunderstood. And you have to get comfortable with that. HR, by and large, of course we're using a big paintbrush here, is not comfortable with being misunderstood. And a vital part of testing and experimentation is that you just fail. Like when I talk to CEOs about marketing, because that's my background or heritage, I tell them, go to a medical supply company, get some lab coats, put your logo, embroider their name on the lab coat, get a logo, and imagine them just throwing things against the wall. And some of which are going to work, most of which are not. And that's great marketing. You allow them the latitude to fail. And if we allow HR the latitude, and we allow HR and they allow themselves, then we'll come up with some really great things that are truly unique for our companies.
And I think I would just add to that, I agree with both William and Josh, is crowdsourcing needs to be part of that. And if you talk about the Zappos example, they did a great job of making sure that all of their employees were involved with helping to create that employer brand. It's not something that HR recruiting needs to think about just in its own little box and, you know, being creative and thinking about how the process goes. It also needs to involve your employees. It needs to involve your candidates. You collect that feedback and you're able to shape the brand and what that is externally and what that means internally as well.
Let me ask a connecting question to that. Should we create employer brands specific to individual departments or audiences, and it's okay for them all to be different?
They are naturally different. In most companies, they are different. The culture, I won't mention the name of the company. I went to a big, very, very successful tech company in Silicon Valley that's very worried about losing engineers to Facebook and Twitter and LinkedIn and all the great new startups. They had a small business unit in San Francisco that had completely open offices with slides and fancy food and everything. They said, oh, we've got to do that in our office in San Jose. So they took a building and they ripped it out. They spent $100 million, redesigned it. And the engineers said, we hate this. We want our cubes back. We liked the cubes. We liked it the way it was. And I think that's true in most companies. Different parts of your company are going to naturally have different cultures and different kinds of styles. And I think that's just the way humans are and the way we are as people. And that's perfectly fine. Even in the Amazon story, the Glassdoor ratings of the Amazon group that does the Kindle and the Glassdoor ratings of the Amazon company are completely different if you look at the metrics.
I think inherent in the question is there culture, cultures? And I believe strongly that there are cultures. One of the things I'd love for Glassdoor to do over the next couple of years is make it, well, first of all, let me ask a question. Is anybody a bad manager? Good. That's honesty right there. Get that person a Snickers bar. We need to make it hard for bad managers to exist. And right now we're looking at the CEO and the company. And if we were to actually go deeper in Glassdoor and rate recruiters, hiring managers, etc., first thing we discover that there is cultures, plural, and that bad managers are finding it harder and harder to exist. in this era of cultural transparency that we're at the very beginning of. And so I would love for it to be very easy to figure out, A, what cultures I best fit in, and where I would thrive, and also where bad managers exist, and great managers exist. Actually, the great managers would be fantastic, actually.
Do statistics still show that the number one reason, we've heard this forever, right? Number one reason people leave their jobs is because of their managers. Is that still the case?
No.
No?
It's less true.
It's less true now?
It's still a factor, but it's not the number one factor. There's other factors. So we have less relationship with our managers than we used to in most companies. We have, flatter companies, larger spans of control. Managers are a lot of times team leaders. So managers have a little bit less control, but they still have a very important role. The one thing I would add on that, listen, any one of us that have been managers have been, there's certain things we've done we haven't been proud of. The best way to deal, and by the way, the leadership gap in corporations is just as bad as it was now as it was 15 years ago. I look at the data every year. It's the same amount of agony about management in your corporations. But I think this openness of feedback from tools like Glassdoor has the potential to really change it. Because you have no choice. People won't always say things to your face, but if they can speak anonymously through a tool like Glassdoor or even an internal tool, and you get that feedback back, it humbles you, as Robert said earlier, and you will change the way you think about yourself. And I think in the economy today that we haven't had in the past, that will improve management everywhere.
And then I think managers need not only the awareness of how they're perceived and where their shortcomings are, but also the tools and the resources to be able to then develop people, encourage them, recognize them, which are all capabilities that a lot of managers lack. They've never been trained in those areas.
I think this question was brought up earlier to some of the panelists, and it was how they measured their employer brand. I think no one's really figured this out, to be very honest, because like you said, it's different for everybody. You measure different things. But any insights on how you think an organization should go about doing that?
Yeah, I'll take a stab at it. I think you know that things are working right when it's easier to recruit. I mean, it's a little soft and kind of vaguish, just because I'm a vaguish person. But I honestly think that if it becomes easier to recruit, yeah, things must be going pretty well. And employer brand.
Well, I'll tell you one just anecdotal thing. When we were an independent company, and we were sort of a unique little researchy thing, we would get people that would come to us and say, I've been dying to work for you because I know who you are, I know what you do, and this is the dream job. And to me, that means we're getting the message out there. Now, that doesn't mean they're the right fit, but that means they know who we are and they come to us with very specific reasons why they want to work for us. That to me is an indication that your brand is working.
I like that.
Yeah, and I think there are now tools. The nice thing is that now there are tools out there where companies can see, what their brand message is, help articulate it, and then the impact it's having. I mean, Glassdoor is certainly an example of that, and there are other ones too. So that makes it, easier for companies to figure out.
I mean, it'd be interesting to ask, I don't know if this is a common practice, ask candidates, why did you apply to us versus our competition? And see what they say. And if they say something that actually rings true or not, you'll know how well they understand your message.
So, being open, being transparent, authenticity, all those buzzwords, we've heard that many times today. I'll have a fireball later, that's fine. So, is there such a thing, especially in social media today, being too open, being too transparent?
I'll take a stab. I broker in shots or photos of my family, extremely inappropriate content, and sarcasm, explicitly.
But that's your brand.
Turns out it is.
Yeah.
And so
Your personal brand.
well, the thing is no one's 100% authentic. We have to get past this idea, and again, it's a drinking game. But there is no such thing as 100% authentic, and let me explain that. I can't tell you everything that's going on in my mind. I'll never be able to take you into the dark crevices in my mind. You don't want to go there. Let me just say that for right now, for real, in front of God and all the world. You don't want to get into the dark crevices of my mind. Brands have dark crevices. There's layoffs, there's rifts, there's products that fail, there's all kinds of things. So it's all a continuum of authenticity. How close can you be to yourself is a goal. But are you ever going to be 100% yourself, either as a corporation or as an individual? No. You'll never get to that place where you're 100%. It will never happen. So give up the idea that 100% is the goal. Okay, make it more like, hey, I just want to make sure that every night I can look myself in the mirror and be myself as best I can within the confines of when we live and where we live.
I would like to give you guys some things to think about that. I've been thinking about this. I wrote a big article on Forbes called Feedback is the Killer App, which is a very long discussion of all these issues. And one of the things I learned was transparency is wonderful. It's inevitable. We can't stop it. But there's some things you have to be careful of.
Mm-hmm.
People should not say things online that they would not say to somebody face to face. Okay, people do sometimes get hurtful when they're anonymous. That's why Secret went away, right? Some of these websites went away. People can put confidential information up there that you don't want to have go public. You could have information about your product or a reorganization or something else that appears on social media, so you have to watch out for that. There could be sexual harassment. There could be all sorts of legal things that come out. So even though transparency is wonderful, it has the potential to be misused. And so when you have anonymous transparency, which a lot of these new tools have now, I think we have to watch it. We have to give people some rules that we live by and say, these are the rules of our company. Don't say anything on the, you saw in the Amazon article, don't say anything on the feedback system.
And Josh, just to say,
yeah.
I don't think it's rules, I think it's values. This is who we are and this is what we stand
Okay, so
for.
maybe they're values.
But there are certain industries where there has to be rules because of high security.
In banking
and
in certain industries, you don't want certain stuff out there. So I think it's tricky. I think we're in the early days of this, and we're going to have to sort of learn how to manage it. But it's here. I mean, we can't stop it.
Or should we?
I'll ask one more question, and then we'll probably have it open to questions. I'm sure you have a lot of questions for the panelists as well. It's another social media kind of questions, because I've always been curious about this. How many people, I mean, obviously you have Facebook, Twitter. I'll just use Facebook example. How many have at least 10,000 fans, followers on their Facebook page? 20,000, 30,000, 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 or more, 150 or more. Jesus. 200? Anybody at 200? Actually, let me preface this. This is your career Facebook page.
Oh, hell
How
no.
many hands dropped? Everyone. Okay, sorry. I
I
should
care
have
about
started with that, right?
William,
Yeah, it's a different type of career.
Did anybody have 100? Did anybody have 100,000 on their Facebook careers page? You have 400,000?
Yay!
What company are you?
Yay!
Hey.
400,000.
I believe it. Yeah, I believe it.
Yeah.
Deloitte's
Okay,
probably
here's
up there.
so here's the,
Where's Jen? I'm sure Deloitte's up there.
I'm pretty sure
all right.
she's
So
lying.
here's the question. We're not hating. It's the question. It's the lead to the question. The question is we're investing so much of content marketing into social, and we're talking to 400,000 people. Are those the right 400,000 people? Are we talking to the wrong people? Do we know who they are? It's the 80-20 rule, right? 20% of the people create 80% of the content. Are we just talking to people we don't need to talk to, and are we spinning our wheels? I'm curious to know what you think.
Well, I think all your eggs can't go in one basket, so you can't just say, you know, we're trying to reach every person that we possibly can on Facebook or every person we possibly can on Twitter. Just as with content marketing, there needs to be different buckets and different content that you're trying to attract to different people in that. It needs to be targeted. I mean, I think we heard a lot of examples of that today from the organizations that were up here, Dell and Salesforce, about how they're really trying to target different audiences using different tools, using different channels. And today there's lots of options available.
And it's like marketing. It's a constant campaign, and over time it'll change. So if you're trying to recruit millennials, you're going to have content targeted towards them, and then later maybe you're trying to recruit, you know, more senior people in other roles. You'll have content targeted towards them. So I don't think just the raw number is the issue. It's targeting the group that you're trying to reach, which is the strategy, which is the marketing. Same thing marketing people have to do too.
Yeah, I think the inherent in the question is talking to, and the fail for me is it isn't about talking to. That's a one-way communication. Doesn't matter regardless of the number. By the way, irregardless is not a word. Anywho, regardless of the number, it's the interaction with people. And that's what people are looking for from brands in particular. They're looking for that interaction. So how we segment and what messages do we put in front of them. But it really, at the end of the day, it's not just putting a message in front of an audience. That's called advertising. It's how do you interact with those people? When they comment or they say something, how do you go back and forth? How do you create a relationship with all of those different people? So I think for me, it's talking to makes it seem a little flat, a little one direction. So I would probably try to make that more about interaction.
Yeah, absolutely. I think most employers do what is called a one-to-many strategy when they need to focus on a one-to-one. It's kind of like what you're saying, and obviously it becomes a resource issue for that. So we've got another 15, 20 minutes. I want to open up for audience questions.
Lars is going to play Phil Donahue.
You're going to Phil Donahue it? All right.
Hello. All right, so we're going to have some time for audience questions, and we have our first one right over here. Oh, microphone coming.
Oh, thank you.
Come on down.
Yeah, thank you. My name is Elena, and those story, I mean, too much transparency, kind of slippery slope. And I wanted to ask you about, last Google story. Have you heard, about the employee of Google who published her salary and created the common spreadsheets and etc. and what happened later? What would you recommend them to do with that? Because it's a kind of tricky situation. They enforce transparency, but right now they are kind of like a big monster who killed the small. So what would you recommend them?
Payroll's emotional. So total comp and benefits is extremely emotional. It gets people, whenever you talk about putting your payroll out online, so first of all, state, municipal, public jobs, they're all out online. So if you want to go find out what they are getting paid, you can. It's usually when you have either values issues or discrepancy in your values, or where there's compression issues. So if you've studied payroll, you've come out of a recession, you hire new people, they're paid at a little bit slightly higher rate than the people that were paid there. That's called compression, payroll compression. Payroll compression is tough to dig out of from an HR perspective, from a payroll and comp and benefits perspective. And so when you highlight that in a public way, it doesn't get there faster, because then it looked like you did something wrong, when in actuality you did do something wrong. So I would take Josh's stance of, unless it's within your values and it's just something, that you think is very important, I probably would err on the side of that payroll is one of those things that's just vastly, vastly personal and emotional.
The example I like to think of is there was that company, and I think in the Northwest, that made everybody's salary $70,000 and raised everybody up. Yeah. And they had a huge problem.
Yeah.
I mean, the people making more money were unhappy, the people making less money were happy. Read the story and you'll see what the issues are with salary transparency. I don't think it's a proven practice.
No, I don't think it is either. And I think I agree. I think it's very emotional when you talk about compensation. And there's equal and then there's equitable. And a lot of companies get confused or kind of operate somewhere in the middle. But when you as an organization, need to think about that sensitive information, I think it's best, to make sure you have those values and those rules around it as well.
Good question.
Other questions from the audience? We have one over here.
So, I don't know how to work this thing. I'll just yell.
No, you're good.
It's working.
Okay. So Josh and William, you mentioned a couple times subcultures within companies wherein a certain group has a much different culture than another group. Have you ever seen any examples or any conclusions based on how that has an effect at the whole company level? Like an example is Amazon that you mentioned, but also Microsoft up in the Pacific Northwest. There's a lot of infighting between different groups, vastly different cultures and experiences and values that are espoused between the two, and they kind of use a lot of internal competition to play off each other. How have you seen that play out, in the long term and at the high level?
I've had an opportunity to talk to a lot of big companies the last couple of years at Deloitte, big clients, and one of the things that comes up in almost every single meeting is the inconsistency of culture and the challenges of communication between divisions, between business units, between product businesses, between geographies. Most companies are struggling to create better relationships between the groups, better sharing of talent, better sharing of ideas, And that's really kind of a new world for large corporations. So I think it's a very, very common problem. And leaders have to, and again, it gets back to leadership. Leaders have to be interconnected, and they have to force those kinds of conversations to happen. Because at the grassroots level, they oftentimes don't. So
yeah, I think where it breaks is there's elasticity to our values. And so when you have corporate values that are actually things that you live each and every day, even when it's tough to live them, those values aren't finite. They're elastic. And whenever you have subcultures that break that elasticity, that's when it breaks down. But most of that elasticity allows for people to operate within a construct. It's okay that the New York office is a little bit more aggressive and the San Francisco office smokes weed. Like, all of that's okay because the top line value says, hey, be who you are. When you're here, be professional or whatever. So there's an elasticity. It's when that cracks apart is when there isn't elasticity.
But I think there is a big trend towards companies trying to build much better relationships between divisions around the world to collaborate. It's a huge issue in corporations, and I think it's a big trend right now.
Yeah.
And that's very cultural. It has to be driven from the top.
Other questions from the audience? Yep, we have one up here. Right in front row.
When you think about transparency and then the whole issue of diversity and inclusion, what are you seeing out there about the company, and what are you hearing about the companies publishing their diversity numbers and being transparent about those, and are there any pitfalls that you've seen in that?
I'll tell you my opinion on that. I think it's great that they're publishing them because now we realize what a difficult problem it is to solve. It's much, much harder to solve. It's an end-to-end problem from recruiting all the way through management and leadership and compensation and unconscious bias. And the fact that that data is coming out means we're going to talk about it and companies are going to work on it. So I think it's perfectly great that especially these tech companies are exposing this information. They're holding themselves accountable now. It's a very difficult problem to solve. We did some research a year or two ago, and we asked companies to characterize their inclusiveness. And 75% of them, I think, characterize themselves as a highly inclusive culture. And then we actually asked them to tell us about their practices, and actually only 15% of them actually practice most of the inclusive practices. There's a big difference between what companies think about the way they are and the way they actually are. And I think the data will help surface that.
I got to take. First of all, I think that most of the way that we approach diversity is a sham. Because most people unaided would say that diversity equals race. And race is one spoke in a much bigger wheel. And I think people fight diversity, not because they don't like the idea, but because they don't like the moral high ground that other people kind of lord over them. If you change the dialogue to diversity equals friction, friction equals innovation, most business leaders would say, yeah, we should probably be more diverse. That's age, that's geographical location, that's race, that's all kinds of things that we're not even thinking about. But unfortunately, in the last 30 years, you say diversity to someone, they think race. And they've been beaten over the head for 30 years about race. And it's a much, much richer tapestry. And there's great business outcomes that can come from diversity, but not beating people over the head about race or gender, or sexual orientation, or whatever. We need to change the dialogue around diversity. And it doesn't need to necessarily be about quotas and numbers, but at the end of the day, you do it because it's in your best interest to do it. If you want to be a company that doesn't innovate, fantastic.
I'll tell you an interesting piece of data. We haven't published this yet, but I'll give you a little bit of preview. We did a 2-year study of talent management. We redid the talent management study, and we found that the pinnacle of talent management, the highest performing companies, focus very heavily on inclusion and diversity. That is the ultimate pinnacle of talent management. When you deal with succession and performance management, all those other things, and you get to inclusion and you really focus on inclusion, those are the highest performing companies in that research. So we're going to publish that in the next month or so stay tuned and you'll see what that's all about.
Actually, let me ask a follow-up question there. So let me get your take then on when Intel announced that they're going to be spending hundreds of millions to help focus on recruiting women to IT technology. How does that affect the brand and in the discussion of you saying this diversity is a a big challenge here. That type of announcement, what does that do for a company like that?
I mean, I think a lot of tech companies are focusing on trying to recruit women. I think Intel's just messaging it and marketing it, making it part of their brand. I think it's a positive thing for the organization. I think it's, certainly, again, trying to target a specific audience, just as they're trying to do in other facets, and part of kind of the branding strategy that we've been talking about. It doesn't necessarily mean that they don't want to hire any men. It means that, we have a focus now on making sure that we are hiring women as well.
Yeah, there is no try. There is just do.
I think, listen, I think I give them a lot of credit for that. I think this is a very big problem. I mean, I have a daughter who's sort of wired like me, and she went into psychology because she didn't want to be an engineer, and she should have been an engineer, but at the school she went to, there were no women engineers. It just wasn't the thing for her. And I think if companies like Intel want to throw money on it, great. It'll help the whole economy.
Yeah.
We'll all be better off.
Applaud it because they're doing things that they recognize that they haven't been as innovative over the last couple of years, and they're missing with their customers, or they're missing with their employees, or they're having a hard time retaining employees. They're not doing it for altruism. So let's just make sure that we all understand that we're all adults. They're not doing it just to make us all feel better. Ultimately, by putting women and putting more women in those roles, it'll help them reach their customers better. It'll help them be a better company because it'll create friction and it'll create innovation. And thusly, it'll probably propel them to more greatness. But yeah, I don't think there's a try. I think you just do that because it's the right thing to do.
Has anyone been to the Pixar animation exhibit that's kind of going around the country now? We've gone a couple times. My kids are very into Pixar movies. And the interesting thing to me is they kind of show you a video in the beginning, and it's an employer branding video because it shows you what it's like to work at Pixar. It shows you what it's like to work on the animation side as an artist, what it's like to be on the technology side doing surfacing and lighting and all these different areas. And it's very much about branding. But the interesting thing about it is that every person that they interview and they show in each one of those divisions within Pixar are women. The woman they interview in surfacing is running that division. In lighting, it's a woman. The woman that's has been there since Toy Story and now is working on Inside Out or finished working on Inside Out is also a woman. So it's a branding message for Pixar, and it's subtle, but it certainly made an impression of what this organization is and how they do have inclusion as part of it.
That's very cool.
Great. So we have a few more minutes for questions. Any more questions from the audience? All right, so I want to close with one question, actually, for each of you. We've talked a lot about from last year's Glassdoor Employer Branding Summit to this year, some of the changes that have taken place in employer branding, and how now we're talking more about the how and less about the why. The why is kind of established at this point, so now we're talking more about how. When you fast forward, and instead of looking at a year from now, let's look at 2 years from now. What do you see the state of employer branding looking like in 2 years?
Well, I think right now there just isn't, and we've talked about this at the conference, and I know Glassdoor has definitely talked about this too, is there just isn't enough investment in employer branding as it is. We're still asking questions like, should recruiting own this? Should marketing own that? So to me, that means that we really are still a little bit immature when it comes to employer branding. So I'd hope within 2 years now, as we have more tools, more strategies, more examples of best practice organizations that have really done a fantastic job of this, consultants like Stacy, experts in this area that are able to really provide examples on what organizations should be thinking about, that investment will increase in this area and it will become a major part of a recruitment function and strategy.
I think for me, preaching to the choir, the folks that are here are already converts. The folks that are listening and watching at home are already converts. In 2 years, may say 3 years from now, I hope this conference is in Vegas and there's 10,000 people there. Because then we'll know. Then we'll know that this has actually become more mainstream. Right now, this isn't mainstream. I think y'all know that, right? This is something that's very niche-y. It's very important to the people in this room and the people that are at home. But I would hope that the concept, the idea, and all the things that people are doing that are fantastic, I hope that there's just a much richer tapestry and a much larger audience.
Yeah, I would agree. There's no question that Glassdoor will be 10 times bigger or something like that within 2 or 3 years. But the thing that I'm the most excited about is for you guys to have Glassdoor inside your company, so your management, not just you, get a sense of the brand and how they can make it better all the time. Instead of doing a once-a-year engagement survey and scratching their head and saying, look, we're 2% better than we were last year, we're happy, we're going to have continuous feedback inside the company, and that's going to make your jobs even easier and more exciting. And I think that, to me, is one of the most transformational things that has yet to happen, is starting to happen inside of companies. And I want, by the way, and I want to thank Glassdoor for leading this charge and really bringing
Agreed.
us to this state. Because
Agreed.
I was going to ask, does Glassdoor now have any companies that have 100% positive reviews and 100% CEO rating? Do you know of any?
So there was at least one 100% CEO rating. That's actually a good lead in, I
Right.
think, to our next session. Were there any 100% companies?
I wouldn't believe a company that has 100%.
I know, right? It just doesn't seem real.
You will actually meet 100% CEOs or
have a
unicorns,
bad
but you'll
day.
meet one shortly. So,
Yeah.
Somebody's not going to like you.
all right, great. Well, that wraps up our panel. Thanks so much for coming and sharing
Thank
your
you.
insights.